Good morning and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Plenty going on. Let me start with the US 10-year Treasury yield sank to 1.77%, the lowest since November 2016, and it's been an incredible round trip. All-time lows 1.32%. JS Blockland, we could get there quickly if things turn really ugly. Bloomberg announced the Chinese government has asked its state-owned enterprises to suspend imports of US agricultural products in retaliation to last week's US tariff announcement. 9th of July last year, I was saying the Chinese government has been quite surgical in its response and is targeting the farm economy in particular. Now, the currency last at, 7066, broke through 7. This is a weekly chart from Simple Trends. Tea commodity says China weaponizes the yuan in the trade dispute. 27th of May, I was saying the currency, which was at that point down 8.8% on a year-on-year basis. I said if this all turns ballistic, then this is going to fly through 7. At the same time, I was saying my baseline is that the trade war is headed off the charts into territory the market will call a tail risk. 9th of July last year, tariff wars, who blinks first? Then another article in May this year where I was quoting a Chinese response saying if there is a decoupling between the two economies, so be it. The Chinese people can endure more pain than the spoiled and hubristic Americans. October last year, I was saying the incident with the USS Decatur, where a Chinese warship came within 45 yards of the Decatur in the South China Sea, is surely a precursor. And then another quote in October, this geopolitical contest will likely escalate dangerously. Powerful forces on both sides are driving the world's two strongest countries toward full-fledged confrontation. So the 10-year even got below 170. This is what I was calling Wizard of Oz level moves in the markets. And look at this, the 10-year yield, this has closed the election night gap. Essentially went above 3 and we're back down where it was on election night. My article over the weekend was called What's Your Road, Man? Holy Boy Road, Madman Road, Rainbow Road, Guppy Road, any road. It's an anywhere road for anybody, anyhow. Where body how. Jack Kerouac's On the Road is an iconic novel and is considered a defining work of the post-war beat and counterculture generations, with its protagonists living life against a backdrop of jazz, poetry and drug use. When I reread these books, I cannot help feeling that the world has lost its wide-eyedness and innocence. I am also tempted to get myself an open-topped car and just take off and find out what exactly is going on. Jim Rogers, who was the co-founder of the Quantum Fund and Soros Fund Management, in fact did precisely that on a motorbike and called his book Investment Biker. Of course, it was George Soros and his subsequent partner Stanley Druckenmiller who forced the pound sterling out of the exchange rate mechanism on Black Wednesday, 16th of September 1992. I recall that day in slow motion and as if it were a newsreel. I was then on the trading floor at Credit Suisse First Boston, and the speed of thought and execution I witnessed that day, I never witnessed again, ever. Permit me the indulgence of dwelling on that day for a moment. At 10:30 a.m. on the 16th of September, the British government announced a rise in the base interest rate from an already high 10% to 12% to tempt speculators to buy pounds. Despite this and a promise later the same day to raise base rates again to 15%, dealers kept selling pounds. On my left was the proprietary trading desk, and he lent billions and billions of pounds at 15%. I asked, "What are you doing?" because the desk was at that moment the only desk in the entire city of London on that side. Everyone desperately was trying to hedge their books. He responded, "Ali Khan, it's not possible for mortgage rates to be at 15%. That was his insight, and that day he did not make as much as Soros, but must have been close. By the evening, Norman Lamont, the Chancellor, had capitulated, the pound was gone in a puff of smoke, and interest rates were back in single digits. Last week, the pound had traded below 121, it's now 121.10. and is now in danger of taking out its post-referendum low, 118.60, but there is considerable debate about this number because it happened in the middle of the night when gremlins and goblins stalk the FX markets. After which, the only significant landmarks left would be the low set in 1985, a few months before finance ministers agreed on the Plaza Accord to limit the strength of the dollar, and then only a few cents lower, parity with the dollar. As I watched the pound fall like a stone, I could not help wondering if this sterling moment is precisely like it was in 1992, a no-brainer. Boris isn't bluffing. Every action, every appointment, every word since he entered number 10 signals the same thing. Britain is leaving the EU on the 31st of October, said the Telegraph's Daniel J. Hannan. The key question is this: can Prime Minister Johnson self-eject Britain? Can he be stopped? This is a political calculation. Prime Minister Johnson has elected to take quite properly an impossible is nothing and can-do political posture. But the bottom line is, can he swing it? If he can swing it, then he has to face down the whispering death, Michael Holding, who was thus nicknamed because he was exactly that when he opened the bowling for the West Indies, that will be the foreign exchange markets. London's Capital Economics conducted an exercise for the dollar-sterling exchange rate and found that for every 10 percentage point increase in the chance of no deal equates to the pound losing 3.5 cents on the dollar. So if there really is still a 65% chance of no deal, sterling stands to drop an additional 22 cents or so. That's parity right there. We're currently experiencing the bow wave of what could metasize into a shock wave. The tariff war sanction and linguistic warfare specialist slapped a 10% tariff on the remaining $300 billion of Chinese imports. US 10-year Treasury yields sank below 190. This is obviously written on Sunday. The entire German yield curve went negative. The world's pile of negative debt jumped to more than $14 trillion for the first time ever. Emerging market currencies went into a tailspin. The market scooped up gold, the Swiss franc, and the yen. The most important currency to watch right now is the US dollar versus the yuan. And as I wrote over the weekend, we were at 697.38 on the offshore markets, and I said it could slice through 7 like a hot knife through butter. We are sitting in a vehicle whose wheels have fallen off, said Derek Matziak, a senior researcher at a South African think tank, the ISS, told AFP about Zimbabwe, but that might well apply to the FX markets momentarily. President Trump keeps talking about weakening the dollar. I find it curious that such a stable genius is yet to calculate that a strong dollar is infinitely better. And if he is serious about his warfare strategy, he needs to add currency warfare to his tariff, sanction, and linguistic warfare arsenal. My perspective about the dollar is this, and note well, it's just a fraction under its 2019 high, even after a rate cut. There is very little President Trump can do. In fact, the risk is that when the market sees he is powerless, the dollar might lift off like the proverbial parabola. This is the Bank of England Sterling Trade Weighted Index via Sun Chartist. This is the Dollar Trade Weighted Major Currency Index via Sun Chartist as well. The 7 level was busted like a hot knife through butter, and this is what the Chinese authorities said. This 7 isn't like an age where once you've passed it, you can't go back, and it's not like a dam where if it breaks, water will flood through. So, plenty to mull over, and a very weak stock market at the same time, a lurch back into safe havens. I came across this in Wired. Makalu is the world's 5th highest mountain, an icy giant 14 miles west of Everest that straddles the border of northeastern Nepal and Tibet. Its 4 sharp ridges ascend almost vertically toward a 27,765-foot summit that's formidable to even the most experienced climbers. Since 1955, there have been fewer than 300 recorded attempts to scale it, roughly a third of how many were made at its more famous neighbor last year alone. I see a photograph as a question posed rather than an answer or a statement, he says. These voyages into nature with a camera have been as much an inner journey as an outward exploration, and they are tremendous photographs, as you can see. And it took me to The Royal Hunt of the Sun, a 1964 play by Peter Shaffer that dramatizes the relation of 2 worlds entering into a conflict by portraying 2 characters, Atahualpa Inca and Francisco Pizarro. And in that, there's this passage. Have you ever climbed a mountain in full armor? That's what we did, him going first the whole way up a tiny path into the clouds, with drops sheer on both sides into nothing. For hours we crept forward like blind men, the sweat freezing on our faces, lugging skittery, leaking horses, and pricked all the time for the ambush that would tip us into death. Each turn of the path it grew colder, the friendly trees of the forest dropped away, and there were only pines. Then they went too, and there was just scrubby little bushes standing up in ice. All around us the rocks began to wind the cold, and always above us or below us those filthy condor birds hanging on the air with great tasseled wings. 4 days like that, groaning, not speaking, the breath a blade in our lungs. 4 days slowly like flies on a wall, Limping flies, dying flies, up an endless wall of rock. Tiny army lost in the creases of the moon. Political reflections. India introduces a resolution to end Kashmir's special status. Home Minister Amit Shah urged members of parliament to discuss the legislation that seeks to end the autonomous status for Muslim-majority Kashmir, which allows only residents to buy property and hold state jobs. I order you not to intervene in my operation. The tanker is under my control. Do not put your life in danger. This is what the IRGC naval officer told the commander of the Foxtrot 236 when Iranian special forces were about to board the tanker Stena Impero. But why would he warn the British Navy not to risk their lives? British Navy's radar sweeps discovered active mode missiles, radar tracking them by means of their semi-radar homing from different launch platforms, main radars which could easily create a saturation attack designed to put the ship in a helpless position and eventually destroy it. The Iranian missiles were ready to fire had the commander of the UK vessel decided to engage with the Iranian fast boats. What tough looks like Hong Kong protests, Sun Chartist again, and things have obviously heated up further. I wrote about Hong Kong, calling it the tinderbox, that is the periphery. This is another iconic photograph from Hong Kong protests. Very interesting clip I came across, Cornel West, and he said the media's liberal self-righteousness against Trump isn't enough, which was the point I was making in that article I wrote called The Showdown, in which I said the president is a political genius, and his characterization of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, or I called it the four wicked witches, and I said they see their role as wearing their moral compass on their sleeve, and politically I felt that meant it was game over. I guess in theory a world leader could say they're going to impose a 10% tariff on Chinese goods, causing stock markets to plummet. Then they and their rich pals could buy a ton of deflated stock, then lift the tariffs and watch their new stock values skyrocket. But that would be cheating, said Brent Butt. And then on the 27th of May, I said Trump is highly tuned to the markets, is in fact something of a 21st century artiste. I called it next level gaming, and I said there are few leaders I can recall that have appreciated the purity of the market signal and played the game at this Yehudi Menuhin virtuoso level. And I said, of course, Carl Icahn has stayed real close. The Economist, the pound is tumbling on fears of a no-deal Brexit. If sterling were to keep following the steeper downward trajectory, then the most likely exchange rate in the event of a no deal would be parity. Let's go to the currency markets. Euro dollar 111.22, dollar index 97.976, dollar yen 105.92, Swiss franc 0.9793, the pound 121.04, the Australian dollar 0.6766, Indian rupee over 70, 70.54, South Korean won 12.15, Brazilian real 3.88, Egyptian pound 16.55, South African rand 14.885. Euro dollar, this chart is from T Commodity, who remains bullish about the euro. I don't. I think we've just been lifted by the yen. Bitcoin lifted over 11,746. With the turmoil in the markets and the streets, suddenly digital gold doesn't seem like such a bad idea. Bitcoin is increasingly seen not only as a bet on the future, but as a shelter for the present. As we've said severally, the purest geopolitical proxy in the markets is gold. As Ben Bernanke once said, people hold gold as protection against what we call tail risks, really, really bad outcomes. And the gold was last at $14.57. Crude oil, $54.93. Iron ore futures collapse back below $100 as rout gathers pace. Iron ore is past its peak pricing after the Vale event this year sent it into the clouds. Super article in The Economist 1843 magazine, the bitter truth behind Madagascar's roaring vanilla trade. It is lychee season, and as we walk, we break off branches of fruit and peel off the pink, spiky shells. In all directions, we can see vanilla vines winding around tree trunks. Each zigzag stem has been trained so it grows no higher than Raminiosa can reach. The family began to plant vanilla vines about 20 years ago, mostly as decoration. At first, the family sold fresh green vanilla pods to tourists, surprised they would pay anything for them. But in 2014, the price of vanilla began to rise. Over the next 3 years, it went from less than $40 per kilogram to more than $600. Requires precise judgment and intuition like winemaking. Family income rose with the price of vanilla, but this has put their crops and even their lives at risk. Soaring price of vanilla has been accompanied by an opportunistic crime wave. Raiders rip out whole vines to transplant them elsewhere, and armed robbers hold up warehouses. Estimates vary, but upwards of 15% of the crop is stolen each year. Madagascar now produces 80% of the world's vanilla. The vine is native to Mexico. Häagen-Dazs shook things up in the 1990s. Companies started selling its ice cream as a premium, indulgent treat. Their advertising campaign was sexy and risque, beautiful people tempering their lust with the ball of the frozen stuff. It was a triumph of branding. The picture of vanilla bloom on the carton drew attention to the vanilla extract that gave the ice cream its rich flavor. The Häagen-Dazs moment was one cause of the vanilla rush. And then it's a fantastic description. Price has fallen back to around $400 from a peak of $600. 3 or 4 years ago, the bush was silent. Now it's full of music. It's also better lit than it used to be. Almost every house has a cheap Chinese solar panel on the roof to provide electricity. Girls flock around the rich young collectors. Boys don't want to continue their education. All anyone wants is a piece of the vanilla pie. And it has become less safe. Very interesting article, worth reading. In the shadow of violence, Sudan rivals sign new power-sharing deal. Sudan's ruling military council signed a deal with its political opposition outlining how they'll share power in a 3-year transitional government, the latest step toward democracy after President Omar al-Bashir's overthrow. I wrote about it at the end of last month. I talked about the Oudh Spring in Khartoum, met a red in tooth and claw counter-revolution, and I called Sudan an African fault line. Zimbabwe reaches tipping point as inflation blacked out. Zimbabwe's finance minister responded to the country's worsening economic crisis last week by blacking out inflation statistics for the next 6 months, boosting the price of the little power that's available 5-fold, and admitting what the IMF told him in April: the economy will contract for the first time since 2008. Zimbabwe is at a tipping point, and if it falls over the edge, it's going to be quite a long way in coming back. If the more commonly used black market exchange rate is used, Zimbabwe's annual inflation is currently 558%, about 3 times the official rate, while Venezuela's is 35,004%, according to Stephen Henke. I wrote about this at the end of July, so that at a more granular level, Zimbabwe is a laboratory experiment with inflation, official inflation, last clocking 176%. I said there is a straw and camel's back moment, but predicting that moment is always a fool's errand. 21st of Jan, I was saying the mind game that ZANU-PF played on its citizens has evaporated in a puff of smoke, and that Zimbabwe was at a tipping point moment. South African all shares up 6.71% this year. Dollar rand, the rand is in a tailspin, 14.90 last I checked. Egyptian pound 16.5485, EGX 30 up 4.45%. Nigerian all share down 12.09%. Ghana Stock Exchange down 6.66%. Coming to Kenya, the average price of Kenyan tea at the weekly auction in Mombasa has fallen to $1.80 per kilogram. Last year's average was $2.58 a kilogram. Last time average weekly prices dipped below $2 was in 2014. Economic challenges in top three importers, Pakistan, Egypt and Britain, had led to a reduction in demand. 2018 issue of 10 and 30-year Euro bonds are trading at 5.2% and 8%. 2019 issue 7-year and 12-year Euro bond at 6.3% and 7.3%. Nairobi all shares up 5.63% year to date. NSE 20 is down 8.72% year to date. Thank you for stopping by.